Hello, 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 hello. It's so great to see everybody. It's so wonderful to be here with these two incredible leaders and to engage in this conversation. As was said, I'm Daniel Williams. I'm currently the president and CEO of the Steelcase Foundation and a member of the 2021 cohort of Ascend Fellows. And one of the things that as we were sort of thinking about this and talking about it and prepping, I kept going back and reading the title of this session, Eye of the Beholder, but specifically Disruptors at Work. Disruptors at Work. And it had me thinking about, and admittedly, this is something I think about a lot, not just because of this, but this idea of identity and expression. Identity and expression, this idea of like who we think we are, how we show up, how we want to show up, and like how does that get expressed? How do people see that? And what does that mean? And sometimes there's real connectivity between our identity and our expression. Sometimes there might be some tension there. And so sort of in that vein, I was curious, like, do you all see yourselves as disruptors? Is that a part of your identity? Is that something that you think of? Is that something that drives your work? And we'll start with you, Joe, and then we'll go to Bimmer.
Yeah, first let me just say how good it feels to be in this room with a group of like-minded individuals fighting for other people, right? But I cannot be my authentic self without saying, what's up? The three's up. The 2018 cohort, right? So I'm a natural disruptor, right? I am a visionary. That's dangerous. You can't have too many people like me in the same space. So I'm very grateful for my team back at the Center for Urban Families in Baltimore because they help keep me grounded. They allow me to be my authentic self, but they frame how I'm able to go out and do the business that I'm responsible for as an ambassador of the organization. I'm founder and CEO, so they give me that respect, but they also say, here's a timeout chair, Joe. You need to go sit over here for a minute, right? So disruption, I think, I want to be disruptive, but not reckless. And there's a difference, right? I think we all know, based off of past recent experience, how somebody with power who is reckless can leave families feeling vulnerable, create a bunch of uncertainty. And I like the fact that, with this network of folks that we have in Ascend, we all are fighting for the same cause, and we learn from each other. We cross-pollinate. It's great that we can get to DC sometimes when we're there together, but it's really more uplifting when we can have the intentionality of coming to Aspen to be together in a way that allows us to spend time in community and get to know each other below the surface. So for me, disruption without being reckless.
Bimmer?
I was a little reckless, man. So growing up in Denver, North Denver, I was inspired by other disruptors, Chicano artists and graffiti artists. And as a teen, not having the knowledge and information that would propel an art career to the next step, I just took it upon myself to create art, and it wasn't with permission. So that eventually led me to a life of trouble. Eventually, I was facing consequences for the things I did. So I had to do some self-reflection and realize that I can use that power for good. So I approached local grants, art grants, and use that money to create that outlet for youth that I didn't have through reaching out through youth centers, juvenile centers, and getting the kids in there to kind of vibe in that same mindset that I have. Yeah, that's the way that I went from reckless to a disruptor.
I love that. I love that. I love that you just flipped it.
I flipped it a little bit.
I want to stay with you on this theme. A common thread for both of you is this passion for providing platforms and spaces and places for young people, young adults, for families to express themselves. Mm-hmm. And Bimmer, for you, how did art become that vehicle of expression? You talked about you were doing it, you putting your work out there, and then you're trying to figure out how to sort of move from reckless to disruption. Right. But why? Why art? Why was that your vehicle? And then maybe could you share a little bit about how you see art, and specifically this work you're doing around the creation of community murals as a way to engage and inspire young people?
Yeah, so just like I said, creating that avenue for young teens to be able to express themselves was really important for me. But also being able to represent indigenous, brown, and black people through my artwork is really powerful because I get to do it at a large scale. I just finished a mural that's 85 feet tall, and it shows an indigenous woman dancing, and that's really important for us to see ourselves in that magnitude, at that power. So that's really important for me to be able to represent the youth in the brown community.
Love it. I love it. Joe, you're doing some incredible work in Baltimore, specifically with families. An important aspect of this you talk about a lot is centering family voice in your work. And so often there's sort of this gap between this articulated value of centering voice and like how that shows up in practice. And so much gets lost in that gap between what we sort of say we value and how we show up day in and day out. And so I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about how you ensure that family voice remains at the center of your work day in and day out. And what are some examples of where you've really seen that make a difference?
Yeah, so context. We're located in Baltimore City. We serve all of Baltimore City as a place-based nonprofit. We also have a national-facing arm of the organization. It's called our Practitioners Leadership Institute, so we do some work outside of the state. However, for our place-based work, we are located in West Baltimore, and we're in zip code 21217. And that zip code, as a point of contact, would be the neighborhood where Freddie Gray lived and died while he was in police custody, right? In that zip code, and go back to the building. So we got a 32,000 square foot building we built from scratch, right? Name of the organization is the Center for Urban Families. But our tagline is helping fathers and families work because we want the community, and particularly the men in the community, to understand although the word families is in the name of the organization, the emphasis is on engaging dads as a part of our work with families, right? So that's on the facade of the building, so when people walk by, guys can see that, right? And within that zip code, there are 17,000 individuals called non-custodial parents, primarily men, but not exclusively. There's some women in it, who owe an aggregate of $28 million in back child support owed to the state, not to the custodial parent, right? There are an additional 4 zip codes, so 5 contiguous zip codes. Of that, there's a group of individuals from those zip codes that owe an aggregate of $120 million in state-owed child support. In addition, those are the top zip codes that people returning from incarceration come back to. It's also the highest poverty rates. So literally, working with that population of parents who live in that zip code, who want the same things we want for our families, right? But it is exceedingly difficult, even if we can help them get a job, right? One of the first things that's going to happen is the state is going to send an order to the employer to garnish their wages. In the state of Maryland, the state can take up to 65% of their W-2 income, right? So the incentive is to go underground. Underground doesn't always mean illegal. It does include illegal activity, but it means working off the books. So you aren't paying taxes. You aren't contributing to society in that way, right? But you want to, right? So that policy issue is something that we have fought for long and hard. And so we connected with our child support director, and we said, hey, this is the issue. It's an issue for the state. You are being dinged on it by the feds because you can't collect debt from this population. So we said to him, we want you to come to our building on Monroe Street in West Baltimore. We don't want to go to you, and we want to bring dads from the community to meet with you, and we want to co-design with you a model that will allow them to get some relief from this debt while they, in return, they work, they get their driver's license reinstated, right? They get an opportunity to participate in the lives of their children. And what we ended up doing is we had a letter that went out to dads who owe child support. It had the logo of the Center for Urban Families and the logo of child support. That led to the legislature becoming interested in it, right? The state then put forward legislation with some legislative champions that then became House Bill 1502 that ultimately became the Step Up program. It got codified in law in the state of Maryland, all from the voices of these men from West Baltimore who said, we want you to think differently about how you engage with us. We don't trust this system. Every time we've tried to engage with a system, we've gotten burned. And now, as a result, there's been some wins in that legislation, and that's from a prior administration. So we now have been meeting with the new administration, and for Threes Up and for, I think it's cohort 2012, you all know that our governor is Ascender Westmore, right? So we will now be taking the voices of dads in Baltimore, working with the administration, having conversations around the state of Maryland about how do you create effective, fair child support policy that will allow dads to come above ground, to be responsible for their children, both financially and otherwise. And that's an example of how you get community voice in an authentic way that leads to policy shifts and change.
Absolutely. That's great. One of the threads that you mentioned community. We talk about community murals. We're hearing the word community a lot over the last couple of days, and sometimes I worry. I'm saying worry. Maybe worry is too strong a word. I wonder. What do we mean when we say community? Like, how are we defining that? I was in a meeting with a partner a couple weeks ago, and she was really excited about what she was working on, and she was like, and we brought in community, and I was like, great, who did you bring in? She was like, all these people from community, and it was wonderful, and I was like, amazing. Who did you meet with? She was like, so many community members, and I was like, that's so great, and I just was like, I just want to get there with you. I feel it, and I wonder sometimes the importance of the specificity of the definition of community in the context in which we're doing our work. How do we do that so that it doesn't lose its meaning or become sort of everything and nothing? And so with that in mind, I wonder, quickly, if you how do you define community in your work, and then how do you define community in your work?
I believe community is a fellowship between like-minded people. Sometimes they may have similar goals, similar mission. I think this is a great example of community right here. I've been here two days already, and I see it here happening. So, and that's something that I create with the youth when I go into these mural workshops. Is I teach them how to become a community on just the simple task of creating a mural. And because a lot of these youth are actually getting ready to go back into their own communities. So hopefully they can take something from what I showed them, take it back and become their own leaders in their community.
Yeah, for me, it's people who live, work, and play in close proximity to one another. And for me, it doesn't always mean we're on the same page. It's just that we are collectively together by proximity. An example of that in terms of how you can get to a halfway solid outcome. A little over a year ago, we had a young black boy, 14 years old, kill a white male motorist in downtown Baltimore. And the mayor asked a group of us to come together to address this issue called squeegeeing. Short story is we brought together 150 folks, a cross-section of Baltimore stakeholders, from people who are executives of businesses, financial institutions, nonprofit, philanthropy, homeboy, homegirl on the street, right? Out of that came level setting. There was some discomfort in the conversation around racist policies and oppression. We dealt with all of that, but in a respectful way. And out of that came a relationship between an executive of a financial institution, of a bank, and a young black boy from Baltimore who had a bank account. And because of the relationship building, they exchanged phone numbers. And one day, the young black boy went to cash his check and couldn't get his check cashed because he didn't have his ID. He called his banker friend, who was the executive of that bank, who interceded on his behalf. Because we created this community, and there weren't like minds that came together initially, but it built a bridge and a bond when people exchanged phone numbers and dealt with each other with respect and trust.
Love it. Love it. Bridges and bonds. Real quick, we have a couple minutes left, and we'll start, Joe, with you, and then we'll end with Bimmer. But as a little bit of a shift, as leaders, as men of color, what myths and misconceptions are you consistently challenging?
As a person of color, as a man of color, as a black man in this country, I know that I make America inconvenient sometimes, right? I know that I am not always valued, and I'm okay with that, but I'm not going to allow you to treat me or disrespect me, right? And for me, it is really, how do you create the conditions where somebody can say something to you and you don't overreact? Like an example, Wes Moore, before Wes announced that he was running for governor, I interviewed him for a charity we both, care about. And I ended up having conversations with his mother. And when I was talking to her about something unrelated, I said, Joy, do you worry about Wes and whether or not, he is going to be a target as a black man? She said, I worry about him all the time. She said, I worry because I'm concerned that if he's out jogging, he has his earpods in, the police ask him to stop, he may not hear him and they may overreact. So I decided I didn't want to bring up that interview question with Wes unless I asked my own mother about me. I asked my mom, I said, do you worry about me still? She said, I worry about you every day, right? And so even though you can have accomplishments in this country, sometimes you will be left behind and be seen as a threat. Even though you may wear a suit and tie, you may present yourself a little bit differently. I think that's one of the challenges we face. And we are accomplished and we can do well and we are not a threat.
Yeah. So through my artwork, like I said earlier, I create a lot of imagery of brown, indigenous, and black people. With that, like I said, I wanted to portray them as powerful and leaders of the community. So that's one of the ways I do it. Also, by me going into this lane and being an artist, where I may be perceived as, I have limits to what I can do, and the only thing you can be is, who knows, a farmer or a construction worker. So I'm breaking that mold by creating these avenues and being an artist, and just showcasing the youth in my community that there's other opportunities out there that you can become anything you want. There's really no limit to what you can do.
We're going to leave it there. Thank you both for being incredible human beings, and thank you all for taking some time.